How's it going? Today I'm going to do a quick kind of autopsy and teardown of this broken LED light. This was one of the shop lights that we had in the tool storage room, and one day it just stopped turning on. And it will sort of turn on. It's plugged in right now. So you can kind of see they're half working. The ones here, it looks like in certain sections of 4 is where you get the most, but it's really hard to tell. And when it was up on the wall, I thought it was decent quality, but having it here on the bench, it's pretty bad. So I'm gonna take a guess and say that there's a power supply in here. What I don't know is whether or not these are mains voltage or if these are like 12 volt strips. And I'll be able to tell. You can see a spider right there. I'll be able to tell once I look at the power supply, but unfortunately I don't have my multimeter here, so I can't tell for sure, so I'm just going to have to do some really good guessing. Now, since there are no screws in this entire thing, it's just popped together, I have gotten a selection of pry tools to try and tear this thing apart. I might try and short. Alright, so hopefully there is no capacitance still left in this thing. They really designed this thing not to come apart easily. I might have to use the brute force and ignorance approach. And because it's already broken, it's not like I can break it too much more. So I'll probably end up breaking this back housing. You see that right there? That is a pop rivet, and that's why this thing is so difficult to get apart. They riveted the thing together. But thankfully, they just have the circuit board clipped in, so I should be able to remove that relatively easily. Just got to make sure that there aren't any capacitors that I haven't already shorted out with my fingers. And that's a pretty bare bones looking circuit board. So give me a minute, I'm going to take a look at this, try and terribly reverse engineer the thing just to see kind of what's going on here. Okay, after looking at this thing for just a few minutes, I figured out the basics of how it works and noticed a couple of the design cues that tell me the quality of this. I mean, if you know anything about circuit boards, you can probably already tell the quality, but I'll get into that. So your mains comes in from the bottom. The ground one here I cut, and that just went to the chassis, and you can see this green one over here marked G is ground. That's also common to the chassis. Your live comes in here, is connected right at the bottom, and goes right back out through this one to the switch, comes back from the switch through this wire, where it is soldered right onto this fuse, which to the best that I can tell is still good. And then it goes into this transformer here. There is a class Y capacitor in parallel going to ground. There are 2 more over here that go directly to ground on this, on the mains side. There's a full bridge rectifier in a discrete chip right here. If I flip around to the other side of the board here, the positive from that comes straight out over to here, where it goes into the second transformer, and you can see there's a generous space here given, and that I think tells me that this is still pretty high voltage and this is the low voltage side. I'm going to just take a guess and say that those are running off of 12 volts, but since I don't have my multimeter with me, I can't say that for sure. Again, this is ground over here that goes to that last class Y capacitor. Those are there for safety reasons. I do not see an opto isolator on this board, so I think the voltage regulation has got to be coming from this 8-pin chip here, and or just some of the passive components. And then this is the chip that's actually doing the switching. That's pretty clear because of the heat sink. And this is what I think may have failed. If there was a part failure, I think it was this, because you saw that the lights would turn on, but they were just, flickering garbage. Another possibility is that one of the capacitors burnt out and is giving a faulty value, causing the circuit to, pretty much die. This crustiness here on the main side is not instilling confidence in me. It's also possible that this being one of those cheap Chinese LED lights, getting all tangled up here. The insulation between the two windings in here or in this one, I don't think this one is such a problem because it does look like they're completely separated. But in this one where they're wrapped right around each other, those could be shorting out, or there could be some capacitance or some current going between the two windings here. And that's about all I can say. The caps, like the big caps, they all look good. Nothing looks like it's burnt out that I can see. And there's some more crustiness here on this chip, which also makes me think it's possible that that's the problem. But I mean, just look at that. It might just be there's a bad connection on these, and reflowing these might help. Reflowing these might help. But with how cheap these are and with the quality of the board, I'm going to say not worth fixing. Just replace it. The design, so I don't know, it's a pretty sensibly laid out board. Why it has 2 sets of coils to step down the voltage, I'm not sure. I like to see these Class Y capacitors. A lot of the cheap, like I'm not talking about this level cheap, I'm talking about the next or 2 levels down cheap. They won't have these because it's just extra parts that you don't really need if you don't care about safety. So that's my thoughts here. If you see something obvious that you think is the failure point on this, definitely tell me. And finally, looking at these LEDs individually, I don't see any of them that are obviously burnt out. They just look like, cheap surface mount LEDs. That soldering, I mean, I'm not a good solderer, but I think I could maybe do a little bit better than that nasty blob job there. And maybe this is also the problem here, is that there's just bad connections on here, and just reflowing these might help. It's hard to say. Well, that's all there is to this one. And you know what they say, buy cheap, buy twice.